When the Jewish second revolt occurred, the Romans put it down brutally. They exiled almost all the Jews, and in order to mock the Jewish connection to the land, they changed the name from Judea to Syria Palestina, from which you can see easily comes Palestine. And why did they call it Palestina? Because the ancient mortal enemies of the Jewish people, the Israelites, were the Philistines, the Philistine, the Palestinians. So that is where the name Palestine comes from. It did not exist in New Testament times. It was instituted by the Roman Emperor Hadrian in 135 AD to mock the Jewish connection to the land. He also he basically crushed Jerusalem. He razed Jerusalem, and he called the new city that he built there Aelia Capitolina, something about the emperor's capital, something like that. So that's where the name Palestine comes from, the land of the Philistines. And so Palestinians, up until 1948, Palestinians could be Arab or Jewish. And more often the term was used for Jews. So the newspaper of Palestine was the Palestine Post. It was owned by the Jews. The bank was the Anglo-Palestine Bank, owned by the Jews. There was the Jewish Agency for Palestine. There was the Palestine Philharmonic Orchestra, all Jewish things. But of course, in 1948, when the Jews announced the establishment of their state, they became Israelis. So now the only Palestinians left were the Arabs. But they didn't really even consider themselves Palestinians. They considered themselves Arabs. The Palestinian identity didn't come about until Yasser Arafat and the PLO and the KGB, which I'll refer to if I don't forget, in the mid-60s. So this is the Palestinian narrative. Until very recently, there was not a Palestinian identity. This quote from a Palestinian leader in 1970, this is even after the beginning of the effort to create a Palestinian identity. This guy, Zuhair Mohsen, said the Palestinian people does not exist. The creation of a Palestinian state is only a means for continuing our struggle against the state of Israel for our Arab unity. So they really want Israel gone so that it can just be a united Arab and Muslim area. In reality today, there's no difference between Jordanians, Palestinians, Syrians, and Lebanese. Only for political and tactical reasons do we speak today about the existence of a Palestinian people, since Arab national interests demand that we posit the existence of a distinct Palestinian people to oppose Zionism, to oppose the Jews. So, this is 1919, so we're back right up to the creation of the mandate. The Arab delegates to the Paris Peace Conference say we consider Palestine as part of Arab Syria, as it has never been separated from it at any time. We are connected to it by national, religious, linguistic, natural, economic, and geographical bonds. It's just Arab. In the Peel Commission, jump forward 20 years, there's no such country as Palestine. Palestine is a term the Zionists invented. There's no Palestine in the Bible. Our country was, for centuries, part of Syria. And now coming up to 2009, every Palestinian in Gaza and all over Palestine can prove their Arab roots, whether they be in Saudi Arabia and Yemen. Speaking personally, half of my family is Egyptian. I like this one. I don't know if you remember this guy named Saab Erekat. He's dead now, but he was the main Palestinian negotiator for years and years. And this is what he said to the Munich Peace Conference in 2014. When you say, accept Israel as a Jewish state, you're asking me to change my narrative. I am a son of Jericho. I am 10,000 years old. I'm the proud son of Natufians and the Canaanites. I've been there for 5,500 years before Joshua ben Nun came and burned my hometown Jericho. I'm not going to change my narrative. So as I said, he's been the chief negotiator for years. He was born in Jericho, but according to his Facebook page, his family is from the Hittite clan of northwestern Arabia. But he is happy to tell you his narrative, which is that he's been a Palestinian for 10,000 years. You can't make it up. Yes, you can make it up. I just want to tell you this amazing story that I discovered from Colonel Richard Kemp. It's on Gatestone Institute. You can Google it. It's the title of it is something about apartheid, but it's not about apartheid. It's about the creation of the Palestinian narrative. And he says that in the mid-1960s, the KGB wanted to oppose Zionism, and so they basically created a Palestinian narrative, and they sent out hundreds and hundreds of KGB agents into the Muslim world to spread this narrative that the Palestinians had been there for thousands of years. And then they sent out hundreds more KGB agents into the Western world with a different narrative, which was about human rights and how the Jews were violating the human rights of these Palestinians. It's an amazing article. And it's virtually the creation of a narrative that is now being used to bash Israel and to challenge its right to the land, saying that the Palestinians are the ones who have been there from time immemorial. And we saw so much detail on that from Itamar. I was delighted that he showed you. Okay, some detail about the Palestinian situation. Back to the War of Independence. When Israel defeated the Arab armies that attacked and the Arabs of Israel, there were 160,000 Arabs left in Israel who did not leave. We saw this morning that most of the Palestinians left at the instigation of their leaders. Just leave for 2 hours and come back when the Jews are dead, and you can take all their property and all their land. Some of the Arabs were moved by the IDF, but by and large, these people fled. And that's going to be the tragedy of the Nakba exhibit at the Human Rights Museum next year. But 160,000 of the Arabs in the Israel that had declared its independence did not leave. They believed the Jews that they were going to be safe. And today, they number 2 million. Sorry, this is an out-of-date number. Many are Israeli citizens. They all have full human rights, and they are doing very well. They're probably the most prosperous, the freest Arabs in the entire world, unless you're an oil sheikh. I was stunned to learn that the majority, Brad, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's an enormous number of Arab doctors and nurses in Israeli hospitals. There are Arabs on the Supreme Court. There are Arab MKs in the Knesset. There are Arabs in every walk of life, and they have complete human rights, and they are those who did not flee. 600,000 to 800,000 did flee, some forced out by the Israeli army, and they became, okay, back up a sec. 600,000 to 800,000 Arabs fled the war. As I said earlier, 600,000 to 800,000 Jews, I think I said 1 million, these numbers are a bit fluid, became refugees from Arab countries. So the Arabs who'd gone to Babylon under Nebuchadnezzar's exile, they had grown to be, there's at least 100,000 Iraqi Jews came out of Iraq in 1948 to 1950. So they had stayed there in the Babylonian exile, became very well established, but the Arabs were furious with Jews because of the fact that Israel had declared a state. So there was almost like a population exchange. So many Arabs leaving to become refugees, so many Jews being kicked out to become refugees. But very quickly, as I said earlier, the Jews took them into tent camps, but they worked their way into society, and now there are 0 Jewish refugees from the 1948 war. And there haven't been any Jewish refugees for probably 60 years. The Jews who fled to Israel were absorbed within a few years. But 68 years later, this is the wrong version of my PowerPoint. How many years later? 48 to... More than 68 years later, the Arab refugees now number 5 million. 0 Jewish refugees left, 5 million Arab refugees left. And the reason for that is that the Arab countries which received these refugees, including the West Bank and Gaza, but also Jordan and Lebanon and Syria, did not absorb them. They kept them as refugees. So there are refugee camps all through the West Bank and Gaza, Jordan and Lebanon. 1.5 million of these 5 million now live in 58 refugee camps in these areas. Many of the 5 million live around the world. Some of them run food fair stores in Winnipeg. Sure.
Of the ones which are now Israeli citizens, why are they not vocal? I mean, they're doing well, they're Israeli citizens. Why are they not vocal?
That's a very good question. Some of them are very supportive of the state and would serve in the army and would be vocal. But there's still, I think, in a lot of them, a lot of the mentality that says that this land really belongs to Allah, and so they're not fully on board. They're happy to be part of Israel, but they're also a little bit in their hearts. They're not there. Yeah, and sometimes, and it wasn't long ago that there was a big uprising within Israel of Arab citizens when there was like an intifada going on, and then within Israel there was a lot of strife with Israeli Arabs as well. So, the Palestinian Authority is seeking the right of return of these 5 million Arabs to Israel. Not to the West Bank, to a Palestinian state, not to Gaza, to a Palestinian state, but to Israel, where they used to live. And so that is a big problem, because Israel is not going to have them back, because they're not friendly. They've taken some back, but they don't want a fifth column in their country, which is people who really don't believe in the Jewish state. There are 2 different UN commissions that look after refugees. The UNHCR, with a staff of 8,600, looks after all refugees from all conflicts in the world except the Palestinians. So about 50 million refugees are looked after by UNHCR. But they formed a special body, the UN did, to look after the Palestinian refugees. And so they have more staff to look after a lot less refugees. And of these 5 million, a lot of them really aren't refugees. But they changed the rules so that you could be a refugee as a Palestinian if you were the son and grandson and great-grandson of a refugee. And they changed the rules so that you would be a refugee if you only lived in Israel for 2 years, not for a much longer period, which it takes for other refugee situations to get a refugee status. So by a biased way of handling refugees, the UN has created the situation where the refugees become a thorn in Israel's flesh. And there's this constant issue of refugees desiring to come back to Israel. Last video, then we'll go on to the legal. We're still in the historical case. We're going to go on to the legal and moral in a minute.
We often hear these historical claims about the Palestinians.
منذ 5000 سنة والفلسطينيون في هذه الأرض.
سيدنا المسيح عليه السلام هو فلسطيني بامتياز.
In a highly politicized debate, it's worth asking, what's fact and what's fiction? Early versions of the name Palestine refer to a small region on the Mediterranean coast bordering Egypt and to the Philistines, an ancient Greek people that, like many others, have vanished over time and have no connection to today's Palestinians. The word Palestine was first formally used by the Roman Emperor Hadrian. During his rule, Hadrian massacred the rebellious Jewish population in the Kingdom of Judea and sent most of the remaining Jewish population into exile. Hadrian was determined to obliterate thousands of years of Jewish presence in the land that is documented with extensive archaeological findings and place names we still use today. And so, he decided to rename the province of Judea, Syria, Palestina, after the vanished nemesis of the ancient Jews, the Philistines. Judea was the last independent state that existed in the land. Century after century, the remaining Jews, as well as other groups, lived under the rule of successive foreign powers. During the time of the Ottoman Empire, the word Palestine was used as a general geographical term, describing the land south of Syria. So when that area fell into the hands of the British at the end of World War I, it was only natural that they named it Palestine. The League of Nations, a predecessor to the UN, granted the victorious World War I powers mandates to control the Middle East and prepare the local peoples for independence. This area came under the British Mandate of Palestine. Two populations lived under the Mandate of Palestine, Arab and Jewish, both of them considered Palestinians. And so, the Jewish-founded Palestine Symphony Orchestra would, upon Israel's independence, become the Israeli Philharmonic. The Anglo-Palestine Bank would become the Israeli Leumi Bank. And this poster, that is often used today to support anti-Israel arguments, was in fact a Zionist ad promoting tourism to the Jewish homeland in Palestine. In 1947, the mandate expired, and the UN decided to split the land into independent Jewish and Arab states. The Jews accepted the UN resolution and called their state Israel. The Arab world, however, rejected the two-state plan, and right after the last British soldiers departed, attacked their newly independent neighbor. After the war, Jordan annexed the West Bank, and Egypt took over the Gaza Strip, which were both assigned to the Arabs as part of the partition plan. Neither country saw a need to set up an independent state in these areas. As a result, an Arab state did not materialize in the former British Mandate of Palestine. Palestinian identity continued to grow after 1948, culminating in 1964 when the Arab League initiated the creation of the PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization, declaring this Arab group the Palestinian people. The PLO demanded the entire area of the mandate, though it called for the destruction of Israel, but did not challenge Jordanian and Egyptian rule. Arab aspirations continued to focus solely on eliminating the State of Israel, instigating another war in 1967, in which Israel gained control over the former Mandate territories in the West Bank and Gaza. So, are these historical claims about the Palestinians true?
لم تمر حقبة في التاريخ خلت من وجود الشعب الفلسطيني في هذه الأرض.
السيد المسيح كان الفلسطيني الأول الذي عذب في هذه الأرض.
No, these claims are false. Jesus was born 134 years before the Romans changed the name of Judea to Palestine, over 1900 years before it became the name of the British Mandate, and almost 2,000 years before it was widely adopted by an Arab population in the region. He was, however, a Jew, living in the Kingdom of Judea. All history put aside, Israel and the international community have endorsed Palestinian national aspirations through repeated peace offers based on a two-state solution. Unfortunately for everyone in the region, Palestinian and Arab leaders have rejected all of these offers. They continue to make false historical claims, hoping to erase Jewish ties and deny Jewish rights in this region.
Okay, that was the historical case. Now we go on to the legal case. First of all, just a bit of understanding about what is international law. We often hear that Israel is breaking international law. The International Criminal Court often says this. The UN always says this. And so Eugene Kontorovich from the University of Chicago is a brilliant Jewish legal scholar, and he's got a great video on what is international law. It's, unfortunately, you don't have this in your hands, but if you Google Eugene Kontorovich international law, I'm sure it would come up. But there are three things that constitute international law. First are treaties. Second are customs and rules. Third are some Security Council decisions. So first of all, treaties. If the Palestinians had accepted any of these peace offers, they would have made a treaty with Israel, dividing the land, Israel agreeing, Palestinians agreeing. We'd have a treaty, and we would have a new international law. But this doesn't happen. Over and over again, the Palestinians refuse to make a treaty. There's customs and rules about war. I referred to defensive war. If you take land in a defensive war, then you don't have to give it back. I believe that comes from The Hague. There's back at the turn of the 20th century, there was a lot of Hague rules that were codified. And some Security Council decisions are treated as international law. The General Assembly, on the other hand, does not have any authority except to pass its own budget. So the Resolution 181 that they made in 1947 to partition the land was not really binding. Israel acted on it, and now it has become an established fact, but the partition of the land is not a valid proposal anymore. It's not a valid law because it was not accepted by the Arabs. So what is not international law are General Assembly resolutions, as I just said, and things like the International Court of Justice, which is always ruling against Israel. Those are simply popularity contests, really. So here is the first of two international laws that are commonly used to beat Israel over the head. I call them the baseball bats, that Israel is said to be breaking international law by occupying the West Bank. So Security Council 242, after the Six-Day War, called for the withdrawal of Israel from territories occupied by Israel. You saw those green portions in the map. Israel took all of that land in a defensive war. And the Security Council wrestled and wrestled, U.S. and Britain versus Russia, the U.S. supporting Israel, Russia supporting the Arabs. They had 5 drafts saying all territories Israel should withdraw from, or the territories Israel should withdraw from, and these were vetoed by Israel's allies on the Security Council. They tried one draft which said Israel should withdraw from some territories, which was vetoed by the USSR. The compromise was Israel should withdraw from territories. And they did. They withdrew from the Sinai Peninsula, which was 90% of the territories that they had taken in that war, so they complied with Security Council Resolution 242. The other baseball bat is the Fourth Geneva Convention, Article 49, which was put in place after World War II to deal with Hitler had done, saying the occupying power shall not deport or transfer parts of its own population into the territories it occupies. And so Hitler moved millions of people, Poles and Germans mostly, back and forth. And so the Fourth Geneva Convention was to keep wartime power from doing that. And people say, well, Israel is deporting or transferring its population into the West Bank. But they're not. Those people are all volunteers. And they're going into a land that has no sovereign except what was given back in the San Remo resolution. So Israel is really the only sovereign there. So the Fourth Geneva Convention is just completely off target and doesn't apply at all to Israel's situation in the West Bank. Israel is not occupying anyone else's territory in the West Bank. The bigger picture of international law is the San Remo Resolution, which led to the League of Nations mandate for Palestine in the League of Nations Covenant of 1922. That is a binding international law which created this Jewish homeland. And nothing has changed that allocation. It could have changed in the proposal of 1947 if the Palestinians had accepted and made a treaty. That would have been binding if both sides had accepted it, but they did not. Again, after the Six-Day War, there was no acceptance of a treaty, and through the Oslo process, these several peace offers have all been rejected. So the standing international law, which applies to Palestine, if you like, is what happened after World War I, and nothing has changed that. So to conclude, Israel, in the legal matter, let's put it that way. Yeah, okay, we still got a little more. Israel is not an illegal occupier. In terms of man's justice, they were mandated for all of that territory by the League of Nations, by victories in defensive wars, and by refusals of the Palestinians to accept a state. And in terms of God's justice, He's the one who gave them the land, sent them out into exile, and is now bringing them back according to His plans. We'll just close with a few moral, let's call them moral principles that support Israel's right to the land. In 1918, there were 60,000 Jews and 600,000 Arabs. And it's fair to say that an argument could be made, and it's still being made, why don't you give the land to the majority? The Arabs were the majority by far, and so it was unjust for the land to be given to the Jews. And the answer is there was lots of room for everyone, and the idea of the Jewish homeland was it would be a place where the dispersed Jews of exile could come home and be safe. That was the whole idea. The Jews had nowhere to call their own, whereas the Arabs had immense land and numerous countries. So remember this picture, 600 times the amount of land, and the Arabs had all kinds of places to go. The Jews had nowhere to go. And they were being offered a tiny, tiny sliver of land the size of Lake Winnipeg. The only Jewish state, 26 Muslim states, 18 Christian states, tiny little niche, according to Lord Balfour. There's a picture of Israel in comparison to Great Britain and California. It's the same size as Vancouver Island, not too dissimilar from New Jersey, and there's the U.S. So Israel needed a place, and there was lots of room for everyone. Secondly, they were an endangered people, constantly persecuted and chased, as we know, for centuries. Even with the threat from Hitler, 6 million killed, the world's doors stayed closed to the Jews after World War II. Even Canada said none is too many. So Israel was a place of refuge for an endangered people. Thirdly, the land was in need of development. Mark Twain called it a desolate country whose soil is rich enough, but is given over wholly to weeds, a silent, mournful expanse, a desolation. T.E. Lawrence, who was a great advocate of the Arabs in World War I, said, "The sooner the Jews farm it all, the better. Their colonies are bright spots in the desert." Finally, the Jews were willing to share this land. Even though there were 600,000 Arabs there, 60,000 Jews, they were not interested in moving those Arabs out. There was lots of room for millions of Jews to come. And as we know, 20% of Israelis today are Arab. But the Palestinians, in their proposals for a Palestinian state, want no Jews in it. They're not willing to share the land. They want it from the Mediterranean to the Jordan to be Judenrein. This is a quote from Alan Baker, who's a former Israeli ambassador to Canada and an expert in international law. He said, "Any attempt to prohibit or deny the presence of Jews in any area is anathema to all accepted civilized and humanitarian norms and should be totally and utterly rejected." So the Jews are completely willing to share the land with any Arab who's willing to live in peace. So just to summarize, the historical case for Israel is their continuous presence since the conquest. They're the only indigenous people to have exercised sovereignty in that area. The moral case, it's a tiny, tiny place. They're an endangered people. The land needs development, and they're willing to share it. Legally, San Remo and the League of Nations gave the land for a Jewish homeland. Nothing has changed that. And the land was illegally partitioned, and then they have reclaimed it in defensive wars. And finally, that's man's version of justice, the historical case, the moral case, and the legal case. God is the most important factor here, and his justice says that he has given them that land forever. He will exile them if need be, but in our generation, he's calling them home, and he's going to sprinkle clean water on them, and he's going to make them a righteous people in that land. And so the case for Israel is strong from man's perspective and from God's perspective. Thank you very much. Okay. We'll take questions.
If there are any questions, I'll hand you the mic.
I just want to, like, Area C, the Arabs are encroaching, and why people just order the IDF to come in and take out the quote settlers farm and stuff. But why would they do about it?
Israel has been embarrassed to assert its authority in the West Bank, even in Area C, which Oslo Accords gave them to be both military and civil authorities. And only now are they summoning up the courage to exercise their authority. And so the Arabs have been encroaching and illegally occupying much of that land. And now Israel is saying, we are taking control of it. If you can't show a deed as an Arab, you can live there, but if you don't have the proof that it's your land, then it's reverting to state land now. And so that's a big move in the last few weeks for Israel to exercise some sovereignty in the West Bank. And I personally think that's what they need to do. They were given that land back in 1920. The Arabs have tried to take Israel away from them, and in the process of that, they have now occupied that land, which they were originally given. So on every count, from the original mandate for Palestine to winning the land back in defensive wars, is theirs. Israel is just shy. In the same way they gave away the Temple Mount, they're afraid to assert their sovereignty. And so as Israel becomes more, I would say, more a people of faith, they're now looking more to assert their sovereignty in the West Bank, in Judea and Samaria, pardon me.